Hey guys, my name is Johnny, and welcome back to the fifth episode. It's kind of crazy that we're already here, and we've already covered amazing creators. Today, we have an absolute um, intellectual and passionate fest of creativity with Jess Adducci. She is a story writer, a producer, comes from a very strong faith-based background, has a passion for all things, both intellectual and how to bring about God's glory into her art. And she's going to talk to us about running a studio and her experience in the film industry, which is a little bit different than games, but it's still very relevant for how we as faith-based creators approach our field. So I'm gonna add Jess here. Hey Jess, thank you
Howdy.
for coming on.
Yeah.
So I'm super excited because so far we've had people that have built apps and games but no film, and I'm super excited to talk to you about how Christians are approaching film. Why don't you give a quick intro about yourself for the audience?
Well, I've been interested. I come from a live action film background. I've been doing that since my teens. As quickly as I could get into it, I did, and did that for a long time. Was in and out as production assistant in different roles depending on whether it was my films or whatever else. I met my husband, who is an animator. So then suddenly I became a producer of animation, just out of necessity and fun. So I've been working in that for about 10 years. And a lot of the stuff, especially after I met Nick and the things that we do, have been for ministries or nonprofits. So we're kind of plugged into that world at least a little bit. So yeah,
that's awesome. And 10 years as a live action filmmaker, and then now doing animations. What is it like to be able to work in live action film? I'm sure that's like the number one question someone hears. Like, what is it feeling like? It's a dream for many people.
It's addicting. It's very addicting. I think it really is. Having worked in live action and animation, they're so different from one another. And to be on a set where a lot of those magical moments are being captured and created, and I think a lot of people go, "Oh, that would like ruin it for me. I'd get to see how it's done or whatever." And to me, it's entirely opposite. Like, just to watch everything as it comes together and what everyone has to do and coordinate and be and everything else was just super cool. One of the first jobs I had, I was a production assistant on a feature film, and they, because I hadn't had any other jobs yet, like big jobs that I could put on a resume, they stuck me in the wardrobe department, which for anyone who knows me, like I am not a fashionista in the least. And so it became kind of a big joke, but I was often stuck in the trailer. It wasn't really a set job. And I would get so angry. I'm really ashamed of how I acted now because it was not professional, but I had a very, very gracious wardrobe coordinator and wardrobe supervisor. And she would see, supervisor especially, she would come in and she would see me and she would be like, "Put that down and go to set." And I'd go to set for like half an hour, and I'd come back with this giant grin on my face. And she was just like, "Now sit down, do your work, do what you need to do." So anyway, it's a magical place for me personally.
Kind of described Devil Wears Prada there. And
that movie had just come out too. It was super wonderful. I had all the jokes going on. I would call my mother
really?
all day and she'd be like, Can you spell Gabbana? And I'm like, shut your mouth. I was really having to deal with like New York, New York designer houses and all that stuff. So it was a little Devil Wears Prada. But
so for like the person outside of, the Hollywood or film industry, they're looking in and they're kind of thinking, honestly, you hear mixed signals about what Hollywood was like. Right. It's kind of interesting that you say it was a dream for you and you kind of kept that dream alive even while you're working through that. Was there anything in particular that kind of stood out to you as far as your experience that made it really special? Was there any particular film or meeting a celebrity or any project that made it feel really special for you?
I mean, I have stories, but like not that wasn't what made it special. Again, I've just been, I got interested in live action and in just filmmaking with largely music. Like I really enjoyed film scores. But then I saw the film Metropolis when I was in 7th grade. I was shocked at what you could do with editing. I think editing was my in. So it's not a set job, surprisingly, but being able to sit there and just make a story out of things was really, that was amazing. Being on a set, I think, again, just the coordination of people. It's usually if you're on a good set, I mean, it's super fun. It's hard work, but like, if you like hard work and you like to have fun, that's a film set. A lot of people get jaded. Like, you can hear, crew themselves complain. You can hear people complain in the industry, but most people are doing what they love. They're doing what they want to be doing, and you're with a lot of them, and it's fun. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes into, I think, across all pieces, art-based kind of things where you are kind of doing it even though there's complaints because it's difficult, you are keeping that dream alive because you're just doing something you absolutely love. Now, I know that when someone hears I've worked in live action film, there's going to be a question that kind of pops up, which is, how did you get into that? Like, how does one even get into that? Because that seems like a dream job. And, is that something that's, you just got lucky, or was it like a combination of someone you met randomly, or like, there's all kinds of stories, but how did you break into the industry?
Yeah, every break-in story is different for sure. Fortunately, I think mine is one of the more accessible ones, as in it can actually be copied. So like I said, I got interested in film from watching films and all that stuff, and then decided that I wanted to get into it more. And I don't remember how we found them or whatever. I know my mom kind of helped me research and do some stuff, but we found the Memphis Film Commission, and they have a book. They have a book of people that are involved in the industry. Everyone still does, because they have to keep track of the the crew that are available for productions, visiting, and all that stuff. So again, I don't remember who suggested it, but I looked at producers specifically, and I emailed, in the very early days of email, I emailed all the producers, and I got one reply. He was a local commercial producer who, and I say local, like Tennessee, and he basically said, if he was, I don't even know how to put it. He would like try to test or try to, whatever. He was like, oh, do you know what this means? If you don't, if you can figure it out and tell me when we meet up, it's just like a little test like that. And, but anyway, went and met him with my mom, explained that I wanted to figure this out and figure out what this all involved. I kind of visited a set. I don't remember really working on it, but I visited a piece of a commercial that he was shooting and kind of got like, oh, this is what this looks like. And then I was invited to PA on a commercial. And I got reamed after that commercial because his wife is actually script supervisor, major feature film script supervisor. And she was like, they left my house a mess. And the mess was, we left a chair out in the yard and some things were like not quite put exactly back in place, where I learned it's like, oh, this is very exact. This is a big deal. And he, basically said, I told him, I said, I didn't know that. And he was like, that's not an excuse. That was kind of what that initial test was about. Like, you figure it out. You better do it now. And then another thing, someone had told him about a conversation they had with me, and it was misconstrued by him as arguing and like, and moaning and groaning about, I can't believe I'm wrapping these birthday presents for a prop. I was happy to be there. I was Charlie Bucket. I was happy to wrap presents, whatever. So it was an interesting challenge to like get in and everything. But he was the one, he had an Avid setup in his basement to edit all these commercials and whatever. And he said, okay, so here's the next step. I edited the commercial. I'm going to show it to you. Then I'm going to give you all the footage and you edit your own. Edit your own commercial. And so that's when I started having a lot of fun and going, okay, here we go. This is where we go. Got into television in high school, television studio in high school. So that gave me access to equipment, again, an editing station and all that stuff. Did it throughout college. And really after, I made the very poor decision to not just swallow my pride and work for commercial companies, which is what I should have done. And instead I was like, I'm going to be an indie film director. So I directed about 5 shorts.
Wow, that's awesome.
They're not great. But they're really great learning experience. They're not terrible, but they're not great. And learned a lot by doing that. And after that, it was either, keep trying to pursue and get on film sets, which sets. I was on a couple of them that came through Memphis, but it's not a hop in town. And I wasn't ready to kind of move to another place to make that happen. So that's when it was more independent. I got involved with Jesus Film Project, got on some of their productions and things like that. So kind of branched off from there.
So I think something that, at least from the outside looking in, there's an interesting thing that happens where with any industry, even games or, any type of things, which is you think that, making a film or making a game is mostly your favorite parts, but most of the actual work is all of the other parts around that. Are there any kind of like myths versus realities of kind of working in the film, like how you're talking about props? That might have been the reality of working in a film or editing or something like that. Is there any kind of like, hey, this is like what you think working in a film is like versus this is a reality of working in a film?
I think, anything like bridging from live action to even animation, I think the reality in both is there are parts that there's a lot of waiting. You're either waiting on someone else to finish their part so you can do your part or whatever. So waiting can be very tedious. Think, I think that is an outside impression. People see what a film set looks like sometimes, and it's like it's a bunch of people standing around. It's kind of like construction crews or something. People are standing around, they're not doing anything. And it's like, yeah, kind of, you have to wait. In some pieces, it's linear, you have to wait. But I think the other big challenge, and again, bridging from live action to animation, it's the same. There's going to be a lot of lower positions. You don't have any creative control. Like you're not there. I think it's where a lot of people struggle. They'll get on set and be like, can I do something here? And it's like, no, because that's not your
Yeah.
job. You're here to be a grunt. You're here to carry equipment. You're here to, do whatever. So I think as long as you can go into, either industry with the attitude of, I'm here to help, I'm here to work, I'm here to do all that stuff, it won't be quite so tedious and quite so disappointing. But I think some people go in and they're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do all these things, or I'm gonna do whatever, and it's like, that's not your job. It's just not at first. So
now, you mentioned that you were also in the story writing portion of that, correct? Now, did you get a little bit more creative control? Was that a little bit more like you could kind of influence the direction, or how was that like?
I mean, half of my stuff is me writing for myself, so of course there's a ton of
Sure.
control there.
Yeah.
But no, working for clients and everything, I think it's they obviously have certain parameters. Obviously you're gonna know if you're writing a feature or a miniseries or whatever. They're gonna have certain goals for that story or property or whatever it is. I guess, I mean, it depends, because like with live action animation, whatever it is, whatever you're writing, you could be writing it on spec where it's your own and you're trying to sell it. Even then it's probably going to get changed. But a lot of the writing I've done is more for clients. So they know what they need, they know what they want, they have a property, they have a story, they have something, and they're wanting help executing that. So
Gotcha.
a lot of the situations I've been in, that does mean some amount of creative control, because they brought you in to be creative. They brought you in, that's your job. If they're good clients, then they will let you do your job and be creative. And I don't think I've ever worked with someone that so overly took control.
So what does that balance look like, where, let's say you're working on a feature film or an animated, is it usually that the client already has some sort of a vision and they kind of, maybe have characters in mind and settings in mind and you're writing for that? Or are they ideating with you? Like, I'm curious to know how much of that freedom do you really have in that process?
Again, like with my personal experience, because like break-in stories, there's a ton of different ways to do things, I'm sure. My experience has been much more, the client knows they have something that they want to develop. And even in more fictional realms, like more narrative, as opposed to, I've done stuff that is much more like based in reality. They're real people, they're telling stories or whatever. I think even then, the fictional stuff that I've written, a lot of that has been, we're trying to convey this information, because I'm that kind of writer too, where it's not quite, the stuff that I've done is not quite edutainment, if you will, but they definitely have things that they're trying to accomplish with the material. And they kind of go, and we're trying to make it go along with this other thing that we're doing. There's usually that kind of collaboration where it's like, it's got to fit in to something that's happening. It's not just standing on its own. But again, even then, the creativity involved, they know they can't just do whatever and spit it out. Like, they're going to need a creative way to tell the story. So they kind of leave that part up to me. But yeah, I've created characters and things like that. But a lot of them have been much more kind of based in reality, now that I think about it. There's first century stuff, because again, I've worked with a lot of ministries. There's a lot of first century stuff, something based on Paul and his life and all that. And that was very, very strict. It had anything that was probably one of the strictest, was anything that came out of those characters' mouths had to be in the Bible. So I could not, like, or it had to be someone, like, there were other characters that were not in the Bible. Nero was in there and whatever. And it was like, okay, make whatever come out of his mouth. But like anything that came out of biblical characters' mouths, like, again, the film was about Paul, then it had to be in one of his letters. It had to be like, it was very, very, very strict parameters.
I'm kind of curious about that, because I think a lot of people watching are, approaching it perhaps with the faith-based, artistic, approach. And they're obviously thinking about, how do I, work my faith into my creativity and my art and things like that.
Yeah.
Did you feel like that, especially in that context, I guess you were creating a Bible-based film, I would assume, where you have to literally quote, did you find that to be helpful, to be able to just say, okay, it's clean, I just get to quote Paul and call it a day? Or did you actually feel like you could have done a better job if you had a little bit more leeway in the process?
That one, I think I can talk about that. That's been forever ago. Okay. That one, I don't want to like offend anybody. I think it was an interesting challenge, because I think some people want cinematic experiences. They want something very epic. But they are going to be very strict on those scripture stuff, especially if it's a ministry. I mean, like that was a big thing of where it was coming from.
Sure.
But to be honest, it's really hard to put those two together. So like Jesus film, the reason that they were doing it and they wanted to do it that way is that's what they had done with the book of Luke. They had made the Jesus film, right? And it was a direct translation of Luke. It was incredibly useful, incredibly popular for its time and for what it did and everything else. And but in our day and age, I think they're looking at bigger things on screen and kind of going, but it needs to be that. It's
Mm.
and because the Jesus film is not that. It was epic for its day,
Mhm.
but things are different, and entertainment is different. And so to try to combine those two with such strict guidelines was incredibly difficult. And I think you can kind of go one way or the other. So like you've got The Chosen now that tries to adhere, but obviously they take liberties and they're not word for word what's coming, things like that. But if you want to do a word for word, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I just think you kind of have to have the right expectations. You're not making Braveheart. You're not making Gladiator. You're not making some big epic, ancient epic, whatever. You're making a Bible translation. You can make it pretty, you can make it interesting, you can do all the things with it. But the story that they were trying to pull out of it and be almost a literal translation was, I think, too much expectation.
Yeah, I think if you are literally taking the Bible and trying to make a story out of it, see, the Bible obviously is divided. It's literature, so it's divided into different types of literature.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it, right, like your Old Testament history books, are much more prone, like you could just draw a story out of them and that's a story,
Mm-hmm.
And even the story of Jesus is a story, and possibly Acts, right? Like you could draw some stories out of them. But I think a lot of Christians do feel the tension between, how do I always think of it like this. Maybe, I don't know if you agree or disagree, but I think of like these concentric circles, like almost like where the core of it is, let's say, the truth of the gospel, and then let's say the art of the core. Let's say if you're making art about the core, you're literally quoting Red Letter or something like that. And then, you're getting a little bit further along and further along, where you're taking the truth here now and then you're expanding it, right? And you're expanding it. And in order to make that fictional experience where it's like bigger and bigger, but still has the maintenance of the core, is extremely difficult. It's something that I think creators regularly suffer and feel the real tension with. I'm sure in your own creative projects, you might have felt the tension of like, how do I represent the truth of the Bible without literally quoting the Bible word for word every other sentence? Well, actually, I should ask, have you ever felt that, and how did you kind of think through that problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an ongoing thing. I think about that every day, to be honest, because of the kinds of things that Nick and I create and want to create. There's kind of a distinct dividing line. There's a who's this for? It's very audience based question, where it's who is this for? Okay, well, if it's for other Christians, then a lot of Christians want something more direct. And for that, like, we make ministry resources, we make things that are direct. We, make discipleship resources. We're happy to have those conversations via our art and to have them be made more interesting and interactive with our art. But we also have a lot of stories that are not directly discipling or directly ministering or directly whatever. And so I think, like I said, I think about that every day. I was thinking about it this morning because there's TV shows that we want to make, and just trying to balance that with how it's going to be received. Because if we put Christian in it, but it doesn't blatantly talk about things, then the Christian community can often like kind of backfire on you.
Yeah.
Best intentions, but like it's a hard line to walk. Or you can be a creator who is Christian, who you're creating things from your Christian lens, your Christian perspective, everything that God has informed in your life. And make beautiful, wonderful, God-honoring art. But it's I mean, this debate that's been going on in music for years and years and years. Is this Christian music or is this secular music? Well, if you have Christian artists making secular music, is that okay? That kind of, is that okay debate. And we're
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, we're very much in the camp of, as much as we love making ministry resources, and to us, that's kind of participating in the church in that sense. We love that participation in the church in that sense. We're very, very keen on developing Christian creatives who just developing their voice and developing their own stories and their own content, so that you have God's perspective out there, if that makes sense. We're not making these things to, it's like the difference between praise music and, again, secular music, where you're talking about your experience with something. We want to tell stories about our experience with God. And then there's things that will directly praise and worship God in that way.
Yeah, that I gave like 3 thoughts in my head about that. Something that I think about was this thing always rings in my head. When I was younger, I did a lot of evangelism and apologetics, and I still do. And I remember one time a Christian person messaged me on Facebook and was criticizing me. And he was criticizing me because I had liked the movie The Dark Knight. And he made a comment on my post because it's like, oh, look, you love this. Look, how could a Christian like this thing? And I just kind of gave I was young, so I kind of gave a tongue-in-cheek kind of comment saying, yeah, you're right. I shouldn't like a story where a man will sacrifice his life against all evil for the good of an entire people. You're right. That's such a terrible thing to like. Right. And it kind of goes into Thomas Aquinas talks about all truth is God's truth. And so when we ask, usually when we ask a question like, is this a secular or a Christian thing, we try to limit the Christianity, but in reality, you should be trying to limit the secularity, because the only way a secular song is good in any way, if it represents any sort of goodness or truth or beauty, is if they borrow from the Christian, right? From God, because all goodness, all truth, and all beauty belongs to God, right? Ultimately. So I almost feel like Christians have the right, we're the inheritors of all of these things, but we feel like we're shut off from experiencing, things unless it's directly in the Bible.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I don't know if that's something that you've seen around Christian creators or not, but it's something I feel all the time when I talk to Christian creators.
Yeah.
Right?
I think, I mean, the Christian Christian creatives that I've been around, it's really funny to meet different circles of them. So we've only recently gotten into like the gaming circles, and there are absolutely game devs who are like, they want to create something that's very one-to-one, like Bible thing, and that's cool. But so many more are just really creative people expressing themselves in their games, and again, themselves means people who follow God, who are genuinely searching for God, who are genuinely constantly under God, sitting under God. And I think that's interesting because in my experience, again, with live action animation, just a different sector of creatives, it's been a much more line in the sand, and it's been much more like, how are you using your gifts with an eyeball on it. And
yeah, 100%.
I think a lot of Christian creatives have gone the route of trying to go through Hollywood, go through more secular circles, industries, whatever, make things that are not directly involved in ministry and everything. And A, they get looked down on, and B, because of that, they get kind of isolated. I mean, there's certain support networks and everything, even in Hollywood, for Christians, but it's easy to get isolated, and in isolation, you're not being told truth, you're not being supported in that way, and it's really easy to go off the rails, and and then suddenly you're not putting Christian stuff out there because you're not really following Christ anymore. So
something that maybe a faith-based filmmaker might be thinking about is, can I even create something that is compelling, not only to Christians, but, widespread? Can I create something like that? Or, is my kind of hope limited in that? What do you think? Do you think that Christians can even create something that's widespread?
Yes.
Amazing, essentially.
Yeah, a resounding yes. I think film, and again, I'm just talking live action, animation, linear story kind of stuff. I mean, the whole point is to explore universal human experience. So like an example that I've been using lately is Christian creatives, Christian filmmakers, whatever, need to be making, let's just say a film about death, because it's going to look different from a lot of other people. And it doesn't mean that you have to go into a gospel presentation, but our perspective on death is very different. And you can tell a compelling story where you push and pull. I think part of the scary nature of being a filmmaker is that films ask questions, they don't answer them, and we want so bad to give the world the answer. And so a truly compelling film will take a topic and push and pull it and push and pull it throughout the entire film, and yeah, it'll land on one side, but ever since especially the 1970s, even on that side there's usually a downside. So like, but, or evil won the day, but it's been kind of mixed like that. But we're supposed to be looking at universal human experience and giving our perspective on that experience and what that looks like. And so we may make a film, again, using death, I may make a film on death, but I have to consider other people's experiences with that topic. I'm not just coming in and going eternity, God, Jesus, and all that stuff. It's much more, well, what is someone else's experience with that? How do they feel about death? Why do they feel that way? And I think in exploring other people's experiences with those themes, you end up with something very genuine. You end up with something where you're still able to kind of tell your side of the story, if you will. You're able to kind of explore your side. And I think a lot of creatives, and it's not creatives, I think a lot of Christians are very scared of asking those questions. They don't want to leave themselves open to those things. No, it's just this one thing. Well, then you can't make a film. No, you're not going to tell a compelling story.
There's an interesting question that I want to ask you, but I'll frame it. Something that I've seen myself, even in myself, right, struggle with is this idea of representing evil, right, in art, which is something that I think is a universal struggle. So when I'm making my games, I love to make story-based adventure games. And sometimes there's a pagan culture that makes sense in the story, but I have to represent a pagan culture, right? That means that I have to make an idol that they're worshiping, right?
Yeah.
And I do think a lot of creators, part of the reason why we see so many Bible things is because it reduces that, it makes it clean, that you don't have to do that kind of thing. How do you go about thinking about essentially representing evil or representing falsehoods in your art?
Right. I might
It's a
get
tough
interrupted by
question, I
kids
know.
here in a second. I think in considering those things, it's been, let me just say, I have great confidence in what's good and right. So if I'm truly telling a story through my lens, then what ends up on screen, you are going to naturally get, not what I think of it necessarily, but you're going to get my perspective on it. So if you're, if you have, I think one of the better example, I'll just have to use an example. One of the better examples recently was the movie Sinners. Went and saw it, and it was
With
so
Michael
far.
B. Jordan, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Set in the South, so I'm all about it. Like, oh, Mississippi, it's got that vibe, it's got that feel. Okay, cool. I can do that. And I saw it. I didn't like it. I'm one of the few who didn't like it, and I went home and had to like think about it. Why didn't I like this? Is it truly not a good movie? What's going on? Like, objectively, subjective, whatever. And a big part of it was how evil things were represented and how other things were represented, how the church was represented in it. And so I finally had a revelation about it, in that a lot of people still see the South as very much full of devils, very much full of demons, and we are a very spiritual place. Like, everything he kind of did made sense on that level. And in the church, as represented in his movie, and I don't know if he intended this or not, but they sort of stay in their own little building. We never see them outside of their building. That's where they go, that's where they stay, and that's where they're safe. But that's not the intention of the church.
Yeah. So
it was interesting when I finally saw it from supposedly like his perspective, from the movie's perspective. I could sit there and go, okay, I see why you would balance these evils, because even he admits that it's kind of evils. I see how you would balance these evils, but I don't see that. If I were to make a movie about the South, so maybe consider my perspective on it, and how I would, like you said, how would I represent? I don't deny there's demons in the South, both literal and figurative. Like, we're, again, a very spiritual culture. But I think at the end of the day, it's important to know why evil seems so attractive and why it should lose in the end, if you will. Like, but you have to have a debate to get there. You have to actually make evil look attractive. You have to understand there's a big speech in Sinners, and not ruining anything at all. There's a particular speech about why joining them is so attractive. And both Nick and I were looking at each other going, yep.
Yeah.
That makes total sense.
It makes it real. It makes it real, right?
Yeah.
Because that's like a daily struggle, even for a lot of people, where evil is just a constant choice. In Genesis, sin is said to be crouching at the door, right, ready to take your life. And that's said in the fourth chapter of Genesis, so it's already there. And I like that answer. I think part of the problem and part of being tough, the tough part of this is the fact that art, by its very definition, expression by its very definition, is not defense, it's offense. In the sense that anytime you go and you put something into the world, you're opening yourself up to criticism, and you're opening yourself to rejection. You're opening up because you're making a point, right?
Yeah.
In some sense, it is the closest thing to what Jesus was doing, in the sense that he was going directly into the world with a message, right? And Jesus was vocally spreading something. But when you put out a movie, when you're putting out a game, and you're saying like, hey, I'm a Christian, I made this game, you're opening yourself up to criticism on both sides. From one side, where they don't like it because maybe it's spreading a theme that they don't like, or from the Christian side, because maybe it's not Christian enough and it's not clean enough, and you represented a pagan temple or you represented evil as something attractive, right?
I can use a much more minor example. Actually, one just came to mind. We're hoping to make a game. We're hoping to get into games, and there's we created a very, very simple brick breaker pinball based machine game, and the main character is a little devil and a little demon who's stuck in hell, and he doesn't want to be stuck in hell anymore. He doesn't want to be human anymore. He doesn't want to be a little devil. And it all comes from an image that Nick created of this little red devil character painting himself white. He's like, I don't want to be that. And there were people that we showed that image to that immediately resonated with it, because they're not taking this to be a literal demon in the, for lack of a better word, mythology of Christianity, and the reality of Christianity. But they're not taking it as that. They see that that's an analogy for how I feel. I feel very alienated from God. I feel very evil sometimes. I feel, all this other stuff, having to admit that you're a sinner and all of that. And then there
Yeah.
are some people who look at that and go, and rightfully so, it was a good point. You're going to have people who look at that and think that you're saying that literal demons can be redeemed.
Yeah.
They're going to think that your theology is messed up. And I look at that, or I consider that criticism. I'm like, okay, got it. Then this is not for those people. We do that a lot with the things that we produce. There's another thing that we put out there the other day called Memory Monsters. It's all about memorizing scripture. And I shared it with a group of homeschool moms, and they're wonderful, wonderful people. The first one pointed out, she said, I love it. I think this is great. You might run into some people in the Christian world who have a problem equating monsters with scripture. And I'm like, again, really great point, really interesting point to consider. If they're having that problem, they're not my audience. And that's okay. So I think a really good way to just kind of like put this out there for faith-based people, you're all going to have different audiences. And that's just reality. There's people who are going to talk to the 40-something, 50-something moms and who need support in a particular way. There's going to be people who talk to outcasts. That's who Nick and I like to talk to. Outcasts who have never seen monsters with scripture before, and suddenly they're interested in that. I was talking to one of my daughter's therapists the other day, and I said, yeah, we're creating something where you can learn more about the Bible, the who, what, where, when of each book of the Bible in a minute or less, as seen through kind of a gaming interface and a social media post kind of mashed up. And she was like, I might actually learn more about the Bible if I saw it that way. And I'm like, there it is. So it's just all in personal expression and the gifts that God has given you, the perspective God has given you, the vision God has given you. There is an audience. There will be an audience for it. And it doesn't matter that my audience is not someone. I know who my audience is. And that matters.
No, that's gold right there. And I think like when you're expressing yourself, you do have to allow yourself some level of freedom and just say, I'm going to start with a blank slate and not with 1,000 preconceived notions, because that could actually create terrible art.
Yes.
I know that you have to run soon, so I'm going to shift the conversation to probably an important topic, which is that the Christian, or at least the faith-based creator market, not the fact that there's creators, but the fact that there's market.
Yes.
I mean, you're running your own studio now. Speak a little bit about what you're seeing as far as the viability of this market, because I'll kind of set the stage, which is a lot of people from the outside see the market as, okay, Jesus film, right? There's The Chosen, and there's, even in this year, I think there's Light of the World and King of Kings. Like and then there's House of David. Like that's how people perceive the Christian market to be, or even Christian creator-led studios to be. You can speak a little bit about the market, what your thoughts are about, what you're seeing in the market and running a studio over here.
I understand where everything is going and why it's going that way. Like, as far as telling those stories, again, you have a lot of, I think, Christian creatives who are finally getting comfortable admitting they're Christians, number one, which is really cool. And number two, they're suddenly tackling those projects they've been wanting to tackle their entire lives. And a lot of times that means you get a House of David, you get a, I know The Chosen is moving on and doing Moses and all these, all these wonderful stories. And kind of like when I say know your audience, none of those are wrong. They're good, and they've been used for good.
And they're in the tightest circle. They're in the Bible circle, right? They're we're literally doing the Bible circle.
Yes. That's a lot of faith-based media right now, though. Like, that's what's really, really striking to people. That's what I think a lot of that's because of The Chosen and what it's done. But I think even so there are faith-based movies that are stories and about what I would call more like faith journeys, right? That's people's journeys through faith. That's still very faith-based, to use that term. I think, as has been in the headlines so many times, the market, the broad market, has realized how much money is out there in the Christian realm. Like, how many people, and they're suddenly going, oh, Amazon's going, oh, okay, House of David and Chosen, and and there's plenty of other distribution companies and everything else, platforms that are very happy to have Christian content now, and to kind of faith-based content, faith-based being more broadly used to cover multiple faiths, because that helps them as well.
Yeah, it's a bottom line kind of thing, and I'm not saying they don't do a good job. House of David is a good show. But I kind of want to push in there is the sense of, is there an opportunity for more, in the sense of, could we get projects that not necessarily come into Christianity but can go from Christianity out? You know what I mean?
So yeah, absolutely. I think that's the next step. I think the first step, again, was just getting people to admit they're Christian. The first step is admitting the truth. And I think getting a lot of this material, flooding the market with it, is both good and bad. You're getting good and bad interpretations of the Bible. I think it's all of this. a major component, this is aside from the market and kind of back to the religion side of things, the church side of things, it's going to be increasingly important for the church to actually be very grounded in the truth, so that they're preaching truth, because more and more you're going to get iterations, interpretations of the Bible or biblical content that may or may not be biblical. Like there's going to need to be a very firm foundation in the church to talk about these things and to be open to talking about what's being put on screen. But personally, total personal opinion, I have no idea if this is the way the market's going or not.
Sure.
I am a big believer in cultivating Christian talent, like I said before, and encouraging them to tell their stories, whatever story that may be. It may not be a Bible story. It may not be a faith journey story, but to cultivate their perspective. And that includes discipling, because you can't tell a good story and stay connected if you're not staying connected to the word. And then just becoming better creatives. And I think in the coming decades, right now, where we're at as a society, I can see why that straight up, let's just put scripture out there as much as possible, makes a lot of sense. But in the coming decades, I think you're going to have an entire generation of people who are going to be over that and be like, well, that's been done to death. Like, we've got plenty of that. And who are going to be ready for the next step beyond that. What does that look like lived out? What does that look like in these universal terms? Like we said, death or, fear or love or any of those things. What does that look like? And then when we might I don't want to just fall back into that, oh, let's do this in a kitschy way. I want to do it well. I want to, the really amazing directors that are out there right now, just imagining if they believed in Christ, if they actually followed God with their entire lives, what those stories would look like and say.
Yes.
So I think that's where we're personally investing. And I think that's where I think faith-based stuff and Bible stuff and everything else, I think that's covered. And like I said, we do more educational things when we do Bible things.
Sure.
And try to make them entertaining. But when it comes to just films that you would see in the theater or streaming content or anything like that, I think the next big step, the next big push is encouraging Christian creatives to just tell their stories really, really well and be so grounded in the word that they're not going to misstep. Like they're not going to misstep majorly as they express their thoughts on evil or anything else that we can be kind of nitpicked over. So
part of something that I'm incredibly passionate about is trying to bring attention to creators that are building and creating, and they need the resources to be able to do that, right? Yes. Whether it's capital or energy or talent or honestly prayer, right?
Yeah,
it could
absolutely.
be any level of that. And I think that I do think there's a massive kind of like waiting time bomb of potential that's ready to be unlocked inside of the Christian spheres, but they just almost need guidance, permission, and enablement, right? Like that's it. And when I say permission, I don't mean someone literally giving them permission, but in the sense of, hey, let's like go ahead and say, not every story needs to be Jesus' story, but can extrapolate out of that, right?
Absolutely.
Even if it means a demon in hell that's trying to be redeemed or something like that. Just so I know that you have to get going. The last thing that I just want to ask is if people wanted to connect with HouseAdducci, or if people wanted to kind of know more about what you're doing, how could they connect with you? I'm going to put a bunch of links in the description for Just the Studio, but if they want to connect, what is the best way to get in touch with you for anything?
I mean, honestly, just YouTube or Instagram, like some of our social stuff. The website is still a mess, so I wouldn't go there. But all of our stuff, all of our work and everything else is on YouTube, DM on Instagram, email me personally. I don't care. That's all good. And that way they can keep up. We're also going to be at Railmakers, Sci-Fi Fantasy Christian Conference in July. Be the first time we've ever done a conference and a booth and done everything up. So I'm pretty excited about that. They can come by and say hi and talk with us there. But yeah, I think just really fine point on what you just said about the financing, distribution, and permission. There's such an opportunity to give permission. We're out there. That's what HouseAdducci does. We are giving permission. Please go make wonderful things. Yes. And we hope we can help with financing and distribution one day too.
Yes, 100%. So thank you so much, Jess, and hope to have you soon again. Well, guys, that was really fun. I honestly wish we had more time because I could have gone on for 4 hours with Jess, and we oftentimes spend a lot of time talking. She's a really important light in trying to even guide me in certain decisions that I often make in terms of art and things like that. But if you guys like this type of content where we highlight faith-based creators, we've already talked to faith-based app makers, faith-based game developers, game designers, guys who are running studios, and now filmmakers. We love people who are building, and we love people who are doing things for God every single day. And our biggest hope is that we bring a new renaissance of light into the world through our work. And if you like this type of content and if you want to be featured, please make sure to email me. And don't forget to like or subscribe if you found this type of content valuable. And if you want to be featured, like I said, feel free to email me. And if you want to get in touch with Jess and her team, the information is below. Please, 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 if you're interested, even in a note of encouragement, make sure to send it to them because they love it. So thank you so much, and God bless.
Before I leave this world, I'll sing my truth, the final ode to my stolen youth. I'll paint the skies with my